second inning stretch to your second inning sit. We'll proceed with the next really outstanding panel. I'm going to introduce them in the alphabetical order of their countries. It was my own stab at diplomacy here. So I wanted to start with Joshua Meltzer, who's to your far right. Joshua is from Australia. He had suggested that he do a brief overview of the Australian rules football, what exactly the rules are, but I suggested it would take much of the afternoon before we begin to get the full understanding of the game. So instead, he will speak from an Australian point of view, and he brings an enormous erudition to it. He's now a fellow in the global economy and development program at the Brookings Institution. He's an adjunct professor both at Johns Hopkins and at Georgetown Law School. He publishes widely. You can pick up the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal and you'll find an article by Joshua. And he has, in addition, some real experience background as a trade negotiator, legal advisor to the Australian Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. And then to my right and to your left is Marcos Robledo from Chile. Chile and Peru, as you may know, were two of the really early participants in the TPP, and yet we don't often hear nearly enough from them about their point of view. Marcos has a great deal of foreign policy experience. He's been a professor of international relations at the Chilean Foreign Policy School. He also has been a journalist. We like journalists here, even though they're not always popular in Washington, I have to warn you. He is. He worked for the. You were an editor of La Época newspaper. He also served as a foreign and defense policy advisor to the recent president, Michelle Bachelet, and he also was a chief advisor to the Minister of Defense. He's published widely. He's really an expert on the theme of democratic civilian control and military effectiveness in Chile. And then again to my left and to your near right, we're delighted to welcome the Deputy Chief of Mission from Vietnam, Nguyen Vu Tung. He is, again, has a deep experience in his background. He, from the Institute for International Relations, he was the first Deputy Director General of the Institute of Strategic Studies in Vietnam. He also has suffered through a good deal of American education. I'm pleased to say he has a Master of Arts in Law and Diplomacy from College of International Affairs in Hanoi, but also a degree from the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy in Massachusetts, and then he has a PhD in political science from Columbia University. And he has a variety of fellowships to his name as well. So as I said, I'm going to start in alphabetical order from the countries. I'm going to ask everyone, if they could, to limit themselves to 10 minutes, and then we'll open it up for questions. So Joshua, the floor is yours.
Thanks. And I just want to firstly say thank you to you and your team for putting together what's, I think, been clearly a very informative event today, and thank you to the Wilson Center. Actually, having spent some time in Michigan and followed the Wolverines and watched American football, and actually watched, I think, almost every season of Friday Night Lights, I'm not sure whether Australian rules football or American football has actually got greater complexity. Maybe we should do a cross-cultural sort of dialogue. We could probably have a day of that and talk through the two types of football codes. What I'm going to do briefly today is I'm going to try to provide a bit of an Australian perspective. I don't work for the Australian government any longer, so these are obviously just my personal views on the matter. But I'm going to try to shed some light on how the Australians approach the TPP, and to provide some context, I'll initially just provide a bit of an overview of the Australian economy and where its main trading interests lie. And I think I'll just also want to tie this in a little bit to China, Australia's trading relationship with China, which I think also influences its view broadly about the TPP, and also speak a little bit about their regional comprehensive economic partnership. Just quickly on the Australian economy, a bit of background. It's a fairly significant economy in the region. Its GDP is approximately 1.3 trillion. It's an advanced industrialised economy. Its GDP comprises about 70% services, similar to the United States. But it's also a significant producer of raw materials and agricultural products. So you see, for instance, in its trading profile, which where it's got a sort of two-way trade of around about $600 billion. It runs a small trade surplus, so exports in 2011 were a little over $300 billion, but about half of that was actually in commodities such as iron ore and coal. But you do though see that services is increasingly important part of Australia's export mix. So for instance, the fourth and fifth largest export comprise tourism and education services. Australia's top three trading partners are, in this order, China, where there's a bilateral trading relationship of about $120, $130 billion, then Japan, which is around $75 billion, and then the United States, which is around about $55 billion. So, and I think that's important to keep in mind, and I'll come back to that a little bit as I continue. Though the trading relationship with the United States is in third place at the moment, it's important to talk about the investment side of things, and there's actually a very deep bilateral investment relationship between Australia and the United States. There's over $550 billion of United States investment in Australia and around about $400 billion of Australian investment in the United States, so it's certainly a deep economic relationship. Australia's economy is open. There's an average tariff rate of around 3%, and trade as a percentage of GDP is around 40%, which compares, say, for instance, to the United States, which is closer to around 25%. Now, in policy terms, what we see is Australia has always been a very strong supporter of multilateral trade liberalisation through the WTO process. But, from a pragmatic perspective, it's also had a very ambitious free trade agreement agenda. So, currently Australia it's had a long-standing FTA with New Zealand, but it's also got FTAs with countries such as Singapore, Chile, Thailand, and it's negotiating, and with ASEAN, and it's negotiating FTAs with China and Japan at the moment as well as some other countries. Now, in terms of the TPP, what this means is that Australia currently has free trade agreements with 5 of the 10 additional TPP countries, and so when we think about what the market access gains are for Australia from the TPP, in terms of the major economies in the TPP, the real advantages are going to come from Japan, Canada and Mexico, which are all very significant economies. Now, this, I think, stands in contrast to the TPP gains in the United States, where really Japan is the only large economy now in the TPP where the United States does not have a free trade agreement. And so I think this creates some divergence in the way that Australia and the United States approach the TPP, at least in terms of market access and the way this stacks up, because as I think we've heard today, that the TPP, I think, has got a range of different goals for the United States. So for instance, one of them is clearly that it's a vehicle for a potential vehicle, at least, for a free trade agreement of the Asia Pacific region. But it's also got important strategic implications. It's building the rules of trade and investment in that area and also possibly more globally. And it's, I think, also seen as a way of developing norms that eventually will also hopefully apply to China. Though, as I said, Japan's entry does create some market access opportunities for the United States, which is significant. But I think these are, sort of generally speaking, some of the key US goals here. Now, I think Australia certainly, is on board with these goals for the TPP in the sense that Australia's trade with APEC economies comprises approximately 70% of its exports. So, for instance, building the TPP out to the APEC economies, I think, is certainly a goal that Australia would sign on to. But I think that, at least in the current set of negotiations, Australia's emphasis really is on getting the market access bit as right as possible. And I think this is not only about reducing tariffs to as low as you can possibly go, but it also extends to areas such as getting the appropriate rules of origin, how you schedule your tariffs, whether you do it, say, for instance, on a plurilateral basis or you do it on a bilateral basis, which is currently the United States preference. Now, in terms of the rules for the TPP, there are some divergences between the United States and Australia. And I think part of this is, again, part of it is explained, I think, by the China position here, because I think if you understand the United States strategic position and view of the TPP as ultimately creating rules of the road that will apply to China, and so kind of cements essentially a sort of market orientation for that part of the world, then you're going to see the United States take a particular view on this, and Australia probably not take such a strong view. And I think part of the reason here is that there is a differences in the way that the growth of China has played out for the United States, and at least in a rhetorical political sense than in Australia, because whereas in the United States there are growing concerns, I think, about the direction of the Chinese economy and the implications in terms of investment and market access for United States businesses. I think in Australia overall there's a sense that the growth of the Chinese economy has been good, and that business works and trade flows, and there aren't the types of challenges and problems that confront the United States. And again, I refer back to the fact that not only does Australia have its largest trading relationship with China, but it actually runs a trade surplus with China. And so that completely changes the politics also around trade with China. Now, in terms of what are the main issues in the TPP currently, I think for Australia, certainly when you think about it vis-a-vis the United States, where there's already an FTA, Australia's going to be looking to get a little bit more. And I guess this gets back to Bob Zoellick's observation is that if the United States wants to go above its current FTAs, it's going to have to offer more. And for Australia, certainly the long-running saw from its previous FTA has been the carve-out for sugar, and certainly there's going to be a push for that, and I think dairy is another important area. But I think also Australia's going to be very ambitious on the services front. Similar to the United States, as I said, services are 70% of GDP and can comprise a growing share of Australia's export profile. On the rules front, I think what we're seeing already is that there's going to be Australian support for rules, but there's going to be divergences in approach. And again, I think some of it comes down to the different perspectives on China. And so we see, for instance, in the areas of state-owned enterprises, that Australia is on board for doing something on state-owned enterprises, but it's got a different approach to the United States. And I think also this is true with cross-border data flow rules. In other areas of the rules, Australia's got its own approaches, which are partly really a reflection of its domestic policies. So, for instance, Australia's got a position on investor-state dispute settlement where it doesn't want to have those dispute settlement mechanisms apply to itself. Now, just broadening this out quickly again to RCEP and again a little bit about China. Because of the importance of the Australia-China trading relationship, Australia's going to have a very strong interest in bringing China into the TPP at some point. I mean, I think that's true for the United States as well. But it's also going to want to make sure that the rules don't develop in the TPP in a way which make it too difficult for China to join in the future. But the TPP is not the only vehicle for Australia, at least, to liberalise trade investment with China. As I mentioned earlier, there's a bilateral FTA underway, but that is frankly going very slowly, and I'm not too sure if that's what the prospects are for concluding that. The other important sort of vehicle here is RCEP, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, which kicked off negotiations last month and is essentially an ASEAN plus 6 setup, right? So it's ASEAN plus China, Korea, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, and India. Now, there's a lot of conversation. We've heard some of it today. I think you hear it around Washington a lot about what's the relationship between RCEP and TPP. Are they competitive? Is it a zero-sum game? Are they able to sort of go on parallel tracks? Are they going to be mutually supportive at the end of the day? I think, though, an important dynamic to think about in terms of RCEP, which doesn't get talked about all that much here in Washington at least, is that it's really an ASEAN-centric process. Instead of thinking about RCEP purely in terms of this is a trade deal that China's leading and TPP is a trade deal that the United States is leading, the RCEP is really an ASEAN plus 6 process where ASEAN is basically central to this process. Now, and I think it's important to think a little bit more in terms of that, because I think it sort of opens up some different ways of thinking about RCEP and what it might mean for the United States and for TPP. For instance, one of the things it does mean is that the United States has an interest, I think, in supporting ASEAN both as a coherent sort of economic and trade space, if not a political space as well. And certainly the RCEP process is something that contributes towards that goal. So in a sense, actually, a good outcome in RCEP, I think, from that perspective is also something which is aligned with a broader US strategic perspective in the Asia-Pacific region. Now, it's also possible, I think, that we're going to see a more ambitious outcome in RCEP than people think. I think that the common perception around town is that TPP will be a gold standard and RCEP will be something significantly less. And I don't mean to suggest that you're going to get something probably as trade liberalising as the TPP, but I do think you're going to get more than probably what the low expectations are. And I think there are three reasons for this. I think one is that, as I mentioned previously, Australia already has a free trade agreement with ASEAN. It's Australia, New Zealand FTA, in fact, with ASEAN. And I'm not sure if anyone's spent any time looking at it, but it's actually a very ambitious FTA. It certainly goes further than ASEAN's done in any of its other previous FTAs. And I think this FTA is going to be a flaw for ASEAN. So I think the level of ambition that ASEAN's going to actually bring to RCEP is already going to be fairly significant. I think the second reason is that there's significant overlap in membership between the RCEP and the TPP. And I think there's some, and in particular, Japan and Australia, obviously, but also New Zealand are members of both. And I think there's going to be, these countries are all going to bring similar levels of ambition into RCEP. I think what they agree to in the TPP in many respects, and certainly also in the rules area, is going to inform a lot of what they try to do in RCEP. So I think you're going to have a coalition of countries as well pushing for ambition in RCEP. And the third reason is that we may in fact see China want to be ambitious in RCEP. I think at the end of the day, this is going to depend on whether there's actually a domestic reform process underway in China and whether the leaders of that see RCEP and trade agreements as a means of giving further support for that. But you know, in addition to that, the RCEP is a trade negotiation where China's going to be at the table from the beginning, which I think is important for China, is certainly where it has not been the case for the TPP, and it's also going to be a forum where China can establish its trade bona fides. And I think it's an understanding, at least to some extent within China, that is important. So we may actually end up in a situation where we have a TPP and an RCEP which actually do liberalise fairly significantly, which and to that extent, the differences between the two may end up being a lot narrower than people commonly expect, and so the possibilities for convergence or dealing with the differences may be not as difficult as some predict. And ultimately, I think the key question then at the end of these two processes is going to be, how do the United States and China further integrate the economies, because they'll be the two countries are left without free trade agreements between them. I think I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Joshua, very much. Marcos, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. You don't need the other two cards.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, thank you very much for the invitation, for the Wilson Center, Kent and Cynthia. Thank you. I have to say that I am speaking also in my personal capacity, of course, and despite, I would say also that there has been also very very little public discussion in Chile about the issue of the TPP. So the main idea that I want to raise here is that despite what could be apparent, the Chilean position in the TPP negotiation, in my opinion, is a little bit complicated from an economic point of view. But also it is a little bit complicated from a political point of view. So I'm going to try to develop this perspective. First, as you know, Chile is a very well-known Latin American open economy. Currently, it has probably one of the widest free trade networks in the world. Currently 20 FTAs with 60 states, and currently more than 60% of its GDP comes from the international economic insertion, and has been, and this is politically very important in the region, a very active supporter of free trade in the Americas. It was a very important partner for the US during the 90s, and also was the first South American country that reached a free trade agreement with the US in 2004. And also has been a very long-standing supporter of the free trade in the Asia Pacific. and one of the founders of the P4. This special Chilean vocation for the Pacific has been developed. Currently, 63% of the Chilean exports, the available information we have, indicate that come from the APEC region. And this is very important. Probably Chile is the country that has one of the most extensive free trade agreements with the Asia-Pacific countries. This is the table where you can see the number of trade agreements Chile has signed with Asian and Pacific countries, not only APEC countries, which includes also India with a partial trade agreement, which is currently under negotiations again. And from a Chilean perspective, since the P4 began to expand to the TPP, it changed the nature of the group. The TPP is seen as a part of a wider policy designed by the US after the WTO paralysis. It's also in the region, internationally, in the Asia Pacific, also by some countries seen as a very hostile to China, as raises some concerns in some East Asian countries, and as select an option and has made an option being conceived as a like-minded group, a group that wants to set new standards, especially proposed by the US. From an economic point of view, I think that Chile has currently very low economic incentive to participate in the TPP. It's the only country that has FTAs with every country of the group. So it has less incentives to negotiate a new treaty. On the contrary, most of the other countries have more incentive than Chile to negotiate. And something that is important, Chile has already, as I mentioned, negotiated and is into force the FTA with the US. This is the chart of the current FTAs agreements in the TPP group. As you can see in the red line, the red letters, Chile has FTAs with all the countries. So the advantage that the country can obtain with the negotiation are very limited, but the gains in the negotiations are little, but the risk, because of the new standards, are very high, and there are no advantage until now that have been formed. This is the same information organized in a different way regarding the number of agreements within the group. So if you take a look also regarding the scope of the coverage of the Chilean agreements, Chile has already negotiated all the disciplines, especially with the US, that are being currently negotiated under the TPP. So I think it gives an idea of how difficult it will be to Chile to gain something new in the negotiation. As we have been informed, because the information has been closed to non-governmental parties until now, the most sensitive issues are, of course, the issues that you can see there: investments, intellectual property rights, environment, labor, and patents, and state-owned enterprises, where the information that we have, if Chile has to reach an agreement under the current condition, it has to give up the previous negotiation that did with the US in 2004. The positive side, has been already mentioned here, is the access of Japan. For Chile, probably that will be a very important incentive to participate despite all the rest of the information. From an international political dimension, I think that there is a very important information, recent information that has been taken in consideration in Chile for the community that has been discussing this topic, and is the growing importance of the South-South economic cooperation between South America and the Asia-Pacific and Asian countries, especially. China has become, in the last 10 years, the first trade partner of South America especially, and since 2 years is the first trading partner with Chile. The US was the first one and is currently the second trade partner. So given the political environment, it creates a very complex situation for the country. And second is also in the future expected an increase of intra-regional Latin American trade, so which creates a double dynamic of more economic interdependence in South America and between South America and East Asia. So this is important because the relatively complex effects of the TPP regarding China. So regarding the new importance of China for South America and Chile, this is something that has to be taken in consideration very carefully. Also, Chile has been part of the group of countries that created very recently the Pacific Alliance. But what is important is that the Pacific Alliance is aimed at strengthening this country's cooperation into the Asia-Pacific, which is something very difficult if it doesn't work well with China and the East Asian countries regarding the TPP. So there are also other consequences because given the US standard put on the TPP, it will also have effects in the relationship between the Pacific Alliance countries and Mercosur in South America. So I think that there are also very important political implications for the TPP regarding South America and Chile and Peru. These are the numbers of the bilateral trade for Chile. You can see China, but the available data shows that this trend will continue in the future. You can see there are many Asian countries and Latin American countries also. And this is the data of the trade between the two regions, between China and East Asia and South America. And you can see the green line, that is the Chinese one. So these are the new information that is important for the region. So this is the context in which this negotiation on the Pacific, the TPP, is taken in consideration in South America. These are the data. This is the data regarding the bilateral relationship, economic relationship on trade between China and its more important partners in South America. So it's essentially the same than the previous. And you can see that for Chile, that China has become, since many years, one of the first partners. So I think that the situation is, at least there is a change in the type of negotiation that is ongoing on the TPP, a very complex situation from Chile from both an economic point of view and a political one. I think, as I said, there are very low economic incentives for Chile, high political cost, eventual political cost. Probably Chile is not the only in this position. There are many other countries that are concerned about the future of the US-China relationships and the consequences for their policies. So I think that this is, in this sense, a very open question. The interesting thing is that the negotiations are open and that they're evolving information on the way countries are approaching the negotiations. I think that the recent visit of the Chinese president to the US has been interesting from this point of view. More recent statements have been more flexible and open room for expecting something different in the next month. But I think it's important also to keep an eye on how some countries are going to be dealt during the TPP negotiation, in particular Vietnam, for instance, but also Chile. The way the US treats Chile will be a very important sign to the Latin American region. So at that moment, I think from a Chilean perspective, it's a complex negotiation. We wish the best for our negotiators there, but it's still a very open issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Very rich presentation. Dr. Tung, please.
Yeah, thank you again. First of all, I would like to thank Woodrow Wilson Center for giving me the opportunity to talk about TPP and TPP-related problems in Vietnam. And secondly, thank you, the audience, for staying late in this section. I really appreciate that. I try to make my presentation short. In line with the topic for our panel, which is what it will take for a successful negotiation. I'd like to make the 2 points. One is that, first of all, it would for the negotiations to be successful, it would take the determination by the negotiating partner, and the secondly, it would also take the goodwill and support from the other negotiating partners. And I would like to take the case of Vietnam as an example. The determination for the part of Vietnam is there, and I would like to quote the saying by the Singaporean Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong, who said that for Asia, trade is strategic, and it is really the TPP is really strategic for Vietnam in many dimensions. The first is the fact that TPP is going in line with the comprehensive international integration policy that has been adopted by our state and government. And together with that, the policy of international integrations needs the support of the rule of law and the rule of the roads that the international community is creating. So that is the first aspect of the strategic importance for TPP for Vietnam. The second one is that we hope and we believe that TPP would accelerate our economic restructuring and the transformation of the growth model. The other aspect of importance of TPP for Vietnam is that TPP would have our country diversify trading partners. Just to give you an example, that currently 80% of Vietnam's imports are from our neighboring, i.e. Asia countries. So other economies, including Latin America and America, is not in the picture yet. So as long as TPP is helping us to join the world community, to restructure our economy and to transform our growth model and diversify our trading partners, we really attach a great importance to TPP, and we are really serious about TPP negotiations. How serious we are, I just want to make 2 examples. Out of 29 chapters of TPP, we are okay with 28. And related to that is that 28 are really bitter for us in some extent, because we have to rewrite so many domestic laws, and we have to accept many pressures from the negotiating partners with regard to labor, to SOE, to government procurement, to environmental protection, and to IPR. These are really the difficult things for us to accept, but we go along with that because we see that accepting these difficult conditions, entering these difficult areas, that would help our economy for the several reasons that I have mentioned earlier. So we go with that, and I can say from my personal point of view that for us now, TPP in Vietnam has reached the point of no return. We cannot go back from what we have committed so far. That is the sum up of the first point I would like to say in the presentation, which is the determination from the part of Vietnam. The next part is about the need or the requirement for Vietnam to seek better understanding, more flexibility from the other negotiating partners. I want to talk about the only one chapter that is still a very difficult issue for us, which is the market access. And it boils down to only two things. One is apparel and textile, and the other one is footwear. And this is really, really difficult for us to accept, because right now, for example, at the 17th round of TPP negotiations in Peru, the US has offered a short supply list in textile, not yet footwear, and the initial analysis is that the list will only affect 5% of trade of Vietnam with that, and it is too small for us to accept. And this textile and apparel sector is the high employment industry for us that create jobs for 2 million people, and it accounts for 50% of our export. So that is really important for Vietnam. So we still need the determination from the other part to give Vietnam something like a flexibility and a lesser application of the general rule of the roads, which is designed to be creating equal opportunity for all. And with respect to market access, many friends have advised us to raise the point that the apparent old rules are really punishing economies like Vietnam. So that is the second point I would like to make in the presentation. And the last point is about the challenges for us right now we are facing. Apart from the chapter of market access, it is the basic question of non-tariff barriers, and it comes in three dimensions. The first one is the some standards applied to our exports products, and I would like to take the catfish as the case in point. The farm bill that has been passed by the Senate, and which is going to be voted in the House, has a very dangerous, I would say, amendment for Vietnam, because it would create something like equivalence standards. And if this equivalence standards is applied, the And it is basically about the, say, safety conditions and environmental conditions, really non-tariff barrier. And if it is applied, the import of catfish to United States market would be stopped right away in October this year, and would be stopped for 7 years before the United States would create something like a standard, equivalent standards. And you can imagine that is the industries that generates $500 million a year for our farmers. The second one is about the recognition of Vietnam as the market economy and developing economy. We still are fighting with the United States on that, because other countries, including Japan, South Korea, the EU, have accepted, have recognized Vietnam as the market economy. That so far the United States has not done that. And it is really related to the non-tariff barrier that I have just mentioned. And the third one, which is really far away from trade, which is the concerns and criticism here in the US about human rights in Vietnam. And I really want to raise that to the American audience here, because we still have we have so many supporters and friends here in the United States, but at the same time we still have criticism from some in the United States on our record of human rights and then democracy, and they really are building forces that threatens to stop even the TPP when it is concluded, and they would even say that they block Vietnam from entering TPP from the human rights perspective, and I think that is really harmful for us. So in short, I would like to say that from the part of Vietnam, the determination is there, but we still need the greater understanding and flexibility from other countries, and the flexibility and understanding can come in the form of capacity building and technical assistance, and I think that the 3E initiative has answered a part of that. And in conclusion, I would like to say that if the market access chapter is not reaching a breakthrough, I really am concerned about the prospects of Vietnam to conclude the successful negotiation on TPP. I really thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. We have a question right away here in the third row, if we can get a microphone.
Thank you. My name is Matt Schul. I'm a reporter with Inside U.S. Trade. And I have two questions. First for Dr. Tung, and second for Professor Robledo. Dr. Tung, you mentioned that the analysis is that the short supply list proposed by the U.S. would only be 5% of Vietnam's trade. Is that Vietnam's analysis? And what would you see as kind of a percentage of the trade that would be acceptable for the TPP to cover? And is Vietnam prepared to, or when does it expect to make kind of a counter proposal on short supply? Will it do that before the next TPP round? For Professor Robledo, very quickly, there's been lots of criticism in Chile recently, former officials basically making the same point that you've made, that the TPP has more costs and benefits for Chile. I just wanted to ask, how do you see that playing out in terms of the presidential election campaign this year? Do you think that the Concertación, which is now in the opposition trying to regain the presidency, will make a real point to highlight this? And then if they win the election, what potentially could they do to change the policy? Would they withdraw from the TPP? I also note that the Concertación governments are actually the ones that started the TPP. So anyway, if you could comment on that. Thank you.
Tung.
Yeah,
We
thank you.
start with you, and then we'll go to Professor
Thank you for
Robledo.
your question. I think that the number of 5% is suggested by our advisors and by our friends here, and I don't think that we have really something like a deep analysis on that. Taken into very facts that are not a threat expert, so I think that we would have a better answer outside this room. I would ask my colleagues to help you on that. But I would like to say that the short supply list in textile is very closely linked with the Yan Forward rule that is really running against Vietnam. As of the question of when Vietnam has a counter offer to the United States, the offer by the United States, I think we need to wait for the negotiating team from the United States to take a better shape. We have Mike Foreman who has been appointed, but we still want to see a stronger team from USTR, and we want to have a better idea of who would be in charge of the negotiation. That is one thing. The other thing is that it is what we have experienced, the conclusion of trade agreements always come at the last minute, and really hectic last minute, and we are not there yet. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Marcos.
Until now, the issue has not been raised on the campaign. My personal opinion is that probably it won't. I think that the most probable trend is that it will be a growing concern from the civil society side. There is a growing number of civil society organizations and NGOs that have been are becoming more vocal on the issue. So maybe that's going to be a more important point in the next month or probably in the next year, because while if the negotiation is finished or not, it will go to the Chilean Congress, to the process of ratification, and there I think it will be a different thing. You know? And regarding the second part of your question, regarding the elections, it's difficult to answer because we really don't have the information on how the government is negotiating. So we don't have an opinion on the kind of a negotiation that is currently ongoing from the Chilean side. Okay, so probably in the next month that will be informed, but until now we don't have information.
The lady here in the front, and then the gentleman in the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th row.
Hi, my name is Celeste Drake. I'm from the AFL-CIO, and I want to make a correction from the prior panel. We do not have a position at all on the TTIP, so it'd be incorrect to say that we're supportive of it. But my question is, it seemed to be an implication on the prior panel that when the discussion goes to labor standards, that somehow that's a social issue and not an economic issue, and the economists aren't studying it. And we believe nothing could be further from the truth. And if workers don't have an opportunity to freely organize and join a union and fight for their own rights, especially when you have globalization that relentlessly drives down wages and benefits and working standards everywhere, that you are going to have economic effects, and that those effects are going to be bad for workers. So I was wondering if each of you could talk about what you see the view of your government is toward the labor standards, enforceable labor standards with the dispute settlement in the agreement, and how you view that as important to the working people of Chile and Vietnam and Australia.
Why don't we start here with Chile?
Okay,
Give
thank
you another tough. Now that you've handled presidential elections, I don't think there's anything that.
No, I think you raise a very important issue. I think labor standards, for instance, will be crucial in this campaign in Chile and for the next government. So this is why I'm trying to say that from a non-governmental perspective, there are many social issues rising here in the TPP negotiation. Okay, but we really don't have the information the way the government has negotiated it yet, because even 1 week ago there was a hearing in the Chilean Congress, and it was declared secret. So NGOs that were there had to leave the room because the minister asked the secret because of the nature of the negotiation, which is understandable for a government that has to negotiate. So probably we will have to wait a little bit, but I'm sure that these issues are going to be very important on the table.
Yeah,
Dr. Tong?
thank you for that question. I think that the question of labor protection and labor standard is used to be important for us, because at the very first phase when we entered the TPP negotiation, labor protection and environmental protection seems to be the most thorny issues, but it turned out to be not the case, because it is not really related to trade. And I agree with you that it is leaning to the side of the political and social issue. And there was some understanding in Vietnam that the labor issue is used as the pretext for the support of the creation of independent labor unions in Vietnam, which is a new idea. But I think that we have done, we have overcome that, and we think that the protection of labor and creating better conditions for our workers is the common consensus between the labor unions, either independent or state-led. So I think that it is no longer an issue. Like I said before, it is one of the 28 chapters that we have been reaching the agreements with the negotiators.
Joshua?
No, thanks for the question, and I take your point that I certainly think the labour issue is an economic one. I think it's an economic and political one in very deep and important ways, because I think your point about the impact on wages is part of the issue here, but I think another very important part of the issue is also the distribution of the gains from trade liberalisation, and I think, you know, in an even broader sense, it's actually about ongoing broader support for trade liberalisation and globalisation going forward. Now, you know, part of the way you can get at that to some extent is through labour chapters, and Australia, I think, is generally very supportive of labour chapters. I don't know where they come out on this specific issue of applying the dispute settlement process to it, and but I think that, you know, overall, you know, they're sort of useful chapters to have in them.
The gentleman, Liz, the gentleman right there.
Hi, Brock Williams with the Congressional Research Service, and my question's for Dr. Meltzer, and perhaps Dr. Tung would like to comment as well. I found your comments on the Australia-New Zealand ASEAN FTA interesting, where you said it was a relatively high standard FTA, and I was just curious how it dealt with the developing countries inside ASEAN. I know the ASEAN FTA itself, amongst the ASEAN countries, has different phase-in periods for the lesser developed countries. So I was wondering if you could compare maybe how the ASEAN-Australia FTA is dealing with that issue relative to maybe how it'll be dealt with in TPP, and how that, you know, what Vietnam would like to see regarding that as well.
Okay, just briefly on that, I think the approach was just essentially built on the ASEAN process, where it was one of different phase-in periods for different countries in ASEAN. I think the other important dimension to that was technical assistance. So in fact, there was a process, I think, established where Australia's aid agency, AusAid, was brought into the loop, essentially, with a promise of support for developing capacity, which would sort of fulfill the type of trade commitments under the FTA. And I think that was a fairly innovative approach, at least from the Australian perspective. And I think the agreement's only still in the process of being implemented. So, and these technical assistance programs are now up and running and still being established. And so how effective they are is still to be assessed, but that's kind of the process at the moment.
Well, we really have reached our witching hour. We try very much to keep our commitment to thank you for coming and to let you get out in a timely fashion. Would you please join me in a round of applause for another outstanding panel?